Sometimes a single word changes the meaning of an entire conversation. An interview is published. At first glance, it seems like many others that have appeared over the years. The questions revolve around the ancient liturgy, the traditional Latin Mass, the relationship between Rome and the Society of St. Pius X, topics that have occupied Catholics for decades. Then, almost unnoticed, one answer contains a single expression. Not a long explanation, not a dramatic accusation, just one carefully chosen word. And because it comes from Archbishop Georg Gänswein, the longtime personal secretary of Pope Benedict XVI, it immediately attracts attention. Those who knew Benedict often describe him as a man who weighed every sentence before speaking. Gänswein spent years at his side, accompanying him through some of the most significant moments of his pontificate and remaining close even after his resignation. When someone with that kind of proximity chooses his words carefully, many people naturally listen. Before arriving at that remarkable expression, however, there is another passage from the interview that deserves attention. Gänswein recalls something deeply personal. He is asked how Benedict XVI reacted when he learned that Summorum Pontificum, the 2007 document that had greatly expanded access to the traditional Latin Mass, was effectively replaced by Pope Francis's 2021 apostolic letter, Traditionis Custodes. To understand why this question matters, it helps to remember what those two documents represented. When Benedict XVI issued Summorum Pontificum, he argued that the older form of the Roman Rite had never been juridically abolished. His intention, as he explained at the time, was to foster reconciliation within the Church and to allow wider access to a liturgical tradition that had nourished countless generations of Catholics. Many faithful welcomed the decision. Communities devoted to the older liturgy grew. Young families began attending. Seminaries in some places reported increasing interest. Pilgrimages centered on the ancient rite attracted thousands of participants. Supporters believed the document had opened a path toward healing divisions that had persisted for decades. Then, in 2021, Pope Francis issued Traditionis Custodes. The new document significantly changed the discipline surrounding the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass. Rather than assuming broad permission, it placed greater authority in the hands of local bishops and introduced new limitations intended to regulate its use. Pope Francis explained that these measures were aimed at promoting unity around the liturgical reform that followed the Second Vatican Council. For some Catholics, this represented a necessary correction. For others, it felt like the closing of a door that had only recently been reopened. It is within this context that Gänswein remembers Benedict's reaction. His words are remarkably restrained. He does not describe anger. He does not describe bitterness. Instead, he simply says that when he read Traditionis Custodes to Benedict, he perceived sorrow in his heart. Not outrage, not resentment, sorrow. It is a brief observation, yet one that many readers found deeply moving. Imagine an elderly Pope Emeritus approaching the end of his earthly life, hearing that one of the initiatives he had considered important for the peace of the Church had been substantially altered. Whether one agrees with Benedict's vision or with Pope Francis's approach, the human dimension of that moment is difficult to ignore. A man who had dedicated his life to the Church witnesses a major change affecting one of the projects most closely associated with his pontificate. Gänswein does not attempt to dramatize the scene. He simply says that he saw pain. That quiet testimony has resonated with many Catholics precisely because of its simplicity. The interview then goes further. According to Gänswein, Summorum Pontificum was never intended merely as a gesture toward the Society of St. Pius X. That assumption has often circulated in public discussions. Instead, he emphasizes that Benedict's vision extended to the whole Church. The document, he suggests, was meant to recognize the legitimate place of the older liturgy within Catholic life and to encourage peace rather than conflict. He also points to something that many observers have noticed over the past 2 decades. A surprising number of young Catholics have shown interest in the traditional Latin Mass. This has puzzled many commentators. Conventional wisdom often assumes that younger generations naturally prefer modern forms of worship. Yet in several countries, the opposite phenomenon has appeared. Young adults, young families, converts, university students. Many have been drawn toward ancient liturgical traditions. One frequently cited example is the annual pilgrimage from Paris to Chartres. Each year, thousands of pilgrims, many of them under the age of 35, walk for days through the French countryside, praying, singing hymns, attending Mass, and embracing a spiritual tradition that predates modern history by centuries. The images have surprised even experienced observers. Long lines of young people carrying banners, families with children, religious sisters, priests, seminarians. None of this proves that one form of the liturgy is superior to another, but it does challenge the idea that attachment to older forms belongs only to previous generations. For Gänswein, this growth appears significant. He argues that dismissing these Catholics as simply opposing the Second Vatican Council misunderstands reality. Many of them openly affirm the Council while also appreciating the older liturgical tradition. Whether everyone agrees with that assessment is another question. The Church continues to debate these issues. But Gänswein's point is clear. He believes motivations should not be reduced to ideology alone. Then comes the statement that has generated so much discussion. Near the conclusion of the interview, Gänswein expresses hope that the restrictions introduced in Traditionis Custodes might eventually be reconsidered. That, in itself, is noteworthy. Yet it is not what has captured the greatest attention. What stands out is the particular word he chooses. He says he believes this is the kairos, not merely the right time, not simply a favorable opportunity. He deliberately uses the Greek word kairos. For many readers, that choice immediately carries theological weight. The Greek language possesses more than one word for time. One is chronos. This refers to ordinary chronological time, minutes, days, years, history moving forward, the steady rhythm of clocks and calendars. It is the kind of time everyone experiences. But kairos means something different. It describes a decisive moment, a moment of fulfillment, a moment when circumstances converge and a unique opportunity presents itself. Within Christian theology, the word often carries an even deeper significance. The New Testament repeatedly uses kairos when speaking of moments in which God's action enters human history in a particular way. Jesus begins his public ministry proclaiming that the time is fulfilled. In the original Greek, the word is kairos. St. Paul also speaks about the fullness of time. Again, the idea is not simply that enough years have passed. Rather, history has reached a decisive moment within God's providential plan. This distinction explains why Gänswein's language has attracted attention. He could have spoken merely of changing circumstances. He could have suggested that public opinion has shifted. He could have argued that enough years have passed since Traditionis Custodes. Instead, he chose a word deeply rooted in biblical language. Does this mean he was claiming divine certainty? Not necessarily. People can reasonably interpret his intention differently. Some hear in his language a theological conviction. Others see a rhetorical way of emphasizing urgency. Still others caution against reading too much into a single expression. Whatever one's interpretation, it is difficult to deny that the choice was deliberate. A man known for measured speech selected one of the richest theological words in the Christian vocabulary. That alone invites reflection. Because if kairos truly refers to a providential opportunity, then Gänswein's appeal is about more than liturgical policy. It becomes an invitation to consider whether the Church stands at an important crossroads. Whether one agrees with his conclusion or not, that question deserves careful thought. What do you think? Does Archbishop Gänswein's use of the word kairos point to a genuine moment of renewal for the Church, or do you think it is being interpreted too broadly? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and if you enjoyed this reflection, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more discussions on the life and history of the Church. If Archbishop Gänswein had been the only voice raising this question, the interview might have faded from public discussion within a few days. Interviews come and go. Opinions are expressed. Headlines disappear. But what made this conversation different was that his remarks appeared at a moment when several respected figures within the Church had been expressing similar concerns, each in his own way. Cardinal Gerhard Müller, former prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, has repeatedly argued that the Church's liturgical tradition should not be treated as though it was something dangerous. While recognizing the authority of the Pope over liturgical discipline, he has also maintained that the older form of the Roman Rite remains part of the Church's living heritage and should not simply be viewed as a problem to be solved. Cardinal Camillo Ruini has likewise spoken about the need for greater serenity in approaching the question. Other bishops and theologians have urged that discussions surrounding the traditional Latin Mass should avoid ideological labels and instead focus on the spiritual good of the faithful. These voices do not all propose identical solutions. Some emphasize broader permissions. Others speak mainly about reconciliation. Still others simply ask whether the current restrictions have produced the unity that was hoped for. But together, they reveal something important. The conversation has not disappeared. If anything, it has continued. That is why Gänswein's interview resonated so strongly. He was not introducing an entirely new debate. He was stepping into one that has quietly continued beneath the surface of Catholic life. And perhaps that is what makes his appeal so significant. It was neither confrontational nor revolutionary. There was no demand for division, no rejection of papal authority. Instead, there was a simple request. A request that the Church once again consider whether another path might better serve her mission. For Catholics, this distinction matters enormously. The Church is not governed like a political party where competing factions simply fight for influence. The Catholic understanding of the Church calls believers to remain in communion even while respectfully expressing hopes, concerns, or opinions. Throughout history, saints themselves have sometimes appealed to popes. Saint Catherine of Siena wrote boldly to Pope Gregory XI. Saint Bridget of Sweden addressed difficult questions with remarkable frankness. Yet both did so with profound respect for the office of Peter. That same spirit appears to characterize Gänswein's remarks. He is not issuing commands. He cannot overturn church law. He cannot restore previous legislation. He simply offers what appears to be a respectful appeal, an invitation to reflection. Ultimately, the authority to regulate the Roman liturgy belongs to the reigning Pope. That has always been the Catholic understanding. No bishop, no cardinal, no commentator, no YouTube channel. None of them possesses that authority. Only the Holy Father can decide whether current disciplines remain as they are or whether future changes should be made. That point deserves emphasis because discussions surrounding the liturgy often become emotionally charged. Some Catholics speak as though every change represents betrayal. Others speak as though every attachment to tradition represents resistance. Neither approach helps the Church. The deeper question is not whether one wins. The deeper question is whether unity can exist alongside legitimate diversity within the Church's liturgical life. This is not an entirely new question. In fact, Christianity has always displayed remarkable liturgical diversity. The Roman Rite exists in several forms. Alongside it stand the Byzantine, Maronite, Melkite, Coptic, Chaldean, Armenian, Syro-Malabar, Syro-Malankara, and many other Catholic traditions. Each preserves its own prayers, customs, music, and spiritual heritage while remaining fully Catholic. Diversity itself has never been the problem. The challenge has always been preserving unity within that diversity. This is precisely why discussions about the traditional Latin Mass carry such emotional weight. For many faithful, the issue is not simply about language. It is not merely about Latin versus the vernacular. Nor is it only about older ceremonies or beautiful vestments. Rather, many describe finding in that liturgy a profound sense of reverence, a silence that allows prayer to deepen, gestures that communicate mystery, an atmosphere that points beyond the ordinary. Others experience those same qualities in the ordinary form of the Mass, celebrated with dignity and devotion. Countless Catholics encounter Christ every Sunday through the liturgy introduced after the Second Vatican Council. Their faith is genuine. Their love for the Eucharist is sincere. The Church recognizes the validity and holiness of both forms. This is why reducing the discussion to slogans does not capture reality. Faithful Catholics exist on both sides of the conversation. Most are not interested in conflict. They simply desire worship that draws them closer to Christ. That may explain another observation frequently made by pastors serving younger Catholics. Many young people discovering the traditional Latin Mass today did not grow up with it. They were born decades after the Second Vatican Council. They carry no personal memories of pre-conciliar parish life. Their interest is not driven by nostalgia because they have nothing to remember. Instead, many describe discovering something ancient that feels surprisingly new. Whether one shares that experience or not, it is difficult to dismiss it as mere sentimentality. It is a phenomenon worthy of careful attention. Perhaps this is part of what Archbishop Gänswein had in mind when speaking about kairos, not certainty, not prophecy, but opportunity. Opportunities often arrive quietly. History teaches this repeatedly. Moments that later generations recognize as turning points rarely announce themselves with certainty while they are unfolding. People only recognize their importance afterward. The Council of Nicaea, the conversion of St. Augustine, the missionary journeys of St. Patrick, the reforms of St. Gregory the Great. None of those events appeared complete or obvious while they were happening. Only time revealed their significance. Could the Church now be approaching another important moment concerning her liturgical life? No one can answer that with certainty. Only history will tell. Yet Gänswein's question remains: is this the time to reconsider? Is this the moment to heal old wounds? Is this the opportunity to recover trust where suspicion has too often taken root? These are not questions that demand immediate conclusions. They invite prayer, reflection, patience. For Catholics, every discussion about the liturgy ultimately leads back to one central reality: the Eucharist. Regardless of language, regardless of ceremonial form, regardless of personal preference, the heart of the Mass is always Jesus Christ truly present in the Blessed Sacrament. That truth stands above every debate. The Church has preserved it through centuries of persecution, councils, reforms, schisms, and renewal. Empires have risen and fallen. Kings have disappeared. Political systems have collapsed. Yet the Eucharist remains. Perhaps that perspective helps explain why this conversation matters. It is not merely about preserving old customs, nor is it about resisting change. At its best, it is about asking how the Church can hand on her richest treasures to future generations while remaining united in faith. That is never an easy balance. Every generation must wrestle with it. Every age faces its own challenges. Perhaps ours is no different. Archbishop Gänswein's interview reminds us that respectful dialogue remains possible. People may disagree strongly while still seeking the good of the Church. They may hold different judgments while remaining brothers and sisters in Christ. That alone is worth remembering. Whether the future brings changes to the current disciplines surrounding the traditional Latin Mass remains entirely in the hands of Pope Leo XIV. No interview can determine that. No speculation can predict it. No commentator can announce what has not yet happened. Only the Holy Father, exercising the authority entrusted to him, can make such decisions for the universal Church. Until then, Catholics are called to something deeper than arguments. They are called to holiness, to charity, to prayer, to fidelity, to trust that Christ has not abandoned his Church. The history of Christianity is filled with moments when believers struggled to understand the path ahead. Yet through every century, the promise of Christ has remained unchanged. I am with you always, to the end of the age. Perhaps that promise is the most important word of all, because whatever happens in the years ahead, the mission of the Church remains the same: to proclaim the gospel, celebrate the sacraments, and lead souls to Jesus Christ. If Archbishop Gänswein is right that this is a kairos, then it will become clear in God's time, not ours. And if it is not, then faithful Catholics are still called to remain steadfast, trusting that the Holy Spirit continues to guide the Church even through seasons of disagreement and uncertainty. History has shown again and again that moments of tension can eventually become moments of renewal. Not because people force the outcome, but because God works patiently through his Church. Perhaps that is the hope beneath Archbishop Gänswein's words. Not the hope of victory for one group over another, not the triumph of one liturgical preference, but the hope that unity and tradition, charity and truth, reverence and communion can walk together once again. That hope belongs to every Catholic, and perhaps it is worth praying for. What are your thoughts on Archbishop Gänswein's message? Do you believe the Church is entering a new season of renewal, or do you see this discussion differently? Share your perspective respectfully in the comments below. If this reflection encouraged you to think more deeply about the life of the Church, consider subscribing and joining us for future discussions. May God bless you, and may He continue to guide His Church in wisdom, truth, and peace.